Not every thought is equal. Some produce, some drain. That distinction rarely gets examined in the middle of the week because the week does not pause long enough for the examination. But Friday morning is the accounting, the moment when the interior reveals what the week has been running on. And for most people, the honest accounting shows that a significant portion of the week's mental energy was not spent on the week's work. It was spent on thoughts that were consuming without producing, draining without advancing anything, running continuously in the background and costing something real while generating nothing useful. The draining thought is not always dramatic. That is what makes it so effective at what it does. The dramatic thought announces itself. The draining thought hums. It does not demand attention in a single crisis moment. It simply sits in the background of every other moment, drawing a small tax on the attention available for everything else. And by Friday, the accumulated tax of 4 days of those background thoughts has produced a person who is more depleted than the week's actual demands explain. The draining thought is the hidden cost of the week, and God quiets what the person cannot quiet alone. This is Friday, April 24th, the last morning of a week that has been drawing on reserves that the draining thoughts made smaller than they should have been. Before the last hours of this week add their own weight to what has already accumulated. Before the weekend inherits what Friday has not released, you came here to have the hidden costs named and quieted, to receive, before the week officially ends, the specific attention of a God who knows exactly which thoughts have been draining you, and who has the authority and the willingness to quiet every one of them. His word declares in the book of 2 Corinthians chapter 10 verse 5 that we take captive every thought and make it obedient to Christ. Every thought, the dramatic ones and the humming background ones, the named anxieties and the unnamed static. Every thought taken captive, not suppressed, taken to Christ, where the draining thought, brought before the one who is the source of life rather than the source of depletion, loses its claim on the interior it has been occupying. Before we enter this prayer, write in the comments right now, Lord, quiet every thought that has been draining my mind this week. I release the weight and I receive your rest. Write it as the identifying and releasing, as the deliberate act of naming what has been running and giving it to the God who quiets what has been taking without giving back. Like this video as an act of releasing the hidden costs before the weekend inherits them. Subscribe to this channel so we can begin every morning together, especially the Fridays when the accounting reveals how much the week's background thoughts have cost. And share this prayer with someone who finished this week more depleted than the work alone explains, not because you know what has been draining them, because you know the one who does. Now let us bring the draining thoughts before the one who quiets them. Lord my God and my Father, I come before you on this Friday morning, and I do something the week has not given me adequate space to do. I stop. I actually stop. Not just slow down. Stop. And in the stopping, I bring before you the honest accounting of what has been running in the interior this week alongside the work. The thought about the relationship that still is not where it should be, that has been running in the background of every other thing I did from Monday through Thursday. The thought about the thing I said or did not say in the conversation that went differently than intended, that has been on a low loop since it happened, returning in unguarded moments with the same footage and the same conclusion that nothing has resolved. The thought about the situation I cannot control that has been performing its helplessness in the interior every time the work paused long enough for it to step forward. The comparison that has been making its quiet case all week that someone else has what I should have, or is where I should be, or is doing what I should be doing. All of those, named, brought before you, the draining thoughts identified and surrendered. Your word declares in the book of Psalms, chapter 55, verse 22, to cast your cares on the Lord, and he will sustain you. He will never let the righteous be shaken. Cast, not carefully place. Not tentatively offer while keeping a hand on what is being given. Cast, the decisive release of something that has been held and that is being sent with intention from the hands of the person who has been depleted by holding it into the hands of the God who is not depleted by receiving it. I cast the draining thoughts now, everything they have been costing, the attention they have drawn, the energy they have consumed, the rest they have prevented, the space they have occupied that was needed for something else, all of it, cast. Before this, Friday's last hours have a chance to run them a few more times. And Father, I want to name something specific about what the draining thought does that makes it different from the legitimate concern. Because not everything that is in the interior on a Friday morning deserves to be released. Some of what is running is the genuine concern that deserves attention and response. The legitimate worry that is a signal about something that needs to be addressed. The honest reckoning with where the week fell short that is genuinely useful for the learning it produces. The draining thought is different from the legitimate concern in one specific way. The legitimate concern moves. It produces something. It generates a response, a plan, an adjustment, a decision. It has forward motion. The draining thought cycles. It returns to the same material with the same framing and produces the same low-level depletion without moving anything forward. The test is simple. Has this thought, after all the times it has run this week, produced anything? An action taken, a resolution reached, a clarity received, a genuine comfort generated? If the honest answer is no, the thought is draining rather than producing. And the draining thought's claim that it deserves continued attention because it has not yet resolved is precisely the lie that keeps it running. The concern that is not resolving through continued thinking is not going to resolve through more of the same thinking. It is going to resolve through being given to God, or through the actual action that the thinking was avoiding, or through the passage of time in the hands of the one who holds all time. Give the draining things to God. Let the legitimate concerns remain as the signal they are. The discernment between the two is one of the gifts the Friday morning prayer provides. Father, I want to name the categories of draining thought that are most common by Friday so they can be specifically released. The first is the unfinished thought. This is the thought attached to something on the week's list that did not get done. It is not a task. It is the mental residue of the undone task. The thing that was intended and was not completed, and that now sits in the interior as a low-level accusation. You did not finish. You promised yourself you would finish. The week is ending, and this thing is still unfinished. The unfinished thought does not help the undone thing get done. It only ensures the person carrying it arrives at the weekend with the weight of the undone as a companion. Your word declares in the book of Matthew, chapter 6, verse 34, that each day has enough trouble of its own. The undone things of this week belong to this week. Some of them will be carried forward to next week, where they will receive their attention at the appropriate time. And some of them, honestly examined, do not need to be carried forward at all. The release of what this week could not hold is not failure. It is the honest acknowledgement of a finite person with finite capacity living in an infinite demand world. And the God who knows what was genuinely possible this week is not holding the undone against the person who brought what they had. Lord, quiet every thought that has been draining my mind this week. I release the weight and I receive your rest. The second is the rehearsal thought. This is the thought running a conversation that has not happened yet. The response being prepared for the message not yet received. The explanation being assembled for the question not yet asked. The defense being organized for the challenge not yet delivered. The rehearsal thought consumes the exact same mental resources as the actual conversation would consume. it costs the same. And unlike the actual conversation, it produces no resolution. It only produces more rehearsal. The guided mind on a Friday morning can name the rehearsal thought for what it is. Not preparation, pre-living. And the question the pre-living never asks is, will the actual conversation require this preparation? Because the actual conversation almost never goes exactly the way the rehearsal predicted. The thing that was prepared for does not arrive. Something else arrives instead, and the preparation, which cost what it cost, is rendered useless by the reality of what the actual exchange produced. Give me back what the rehearsal spent, Lord. Release the mental resources the pre-living consumed, and let the conversations that actually need to happen this week happen from the present reality rather than from the imagined version I have been practicing. The third is the comparison thought. By Friday, the comparison thought has had the full week's material to work with. The updates about what others accomplished, the posts about where others are, the observations about what others have that have been building a quiet case all week that this person's life, measured against the highlights of others' lives, is coming up short. The comparison thought does not compare equal things. It compares the full reality of the person's life, including its private costs and its hidden difficulties, against the curated surface of others' lives. It is never a fair comparison, and it never produces anything useful. Only the depletion of someone who measured themselves against an inaccurate standard and found themselves lacking by the measurement. Your word declares in the book of 2 Corinthians, chapter 10, verse 12, that when people compare themselves with others, they are not wise. Not wise, the comparison thought is, at its root, a wisdom failure. And the cleared mind of a Friday morning can name it as such and release it as such, not with self-condemnation, with the honest acknowledgement that the measuring stick the comparison was using has nothing to do with the actual value of the life being measured. Lord, quiet every thought that has been draining my mind this week. I release the weight, and I receive your rest. The fourth is the dread thought. This is the thought that has been building anticipatory anxiety about something that has not yet happened. The difficult conversation next week that the dread thought has already been living inside for 4 days. The approaching situation that the dread thought has been generating its worst-case version of since the week began. The unknown outcome that the dread thought has been imagining in its most threatening form every time the week paused long enough to let the imagination run. The dread thought is not preparation. It is suffering in advance of an event that has not arrived and may not arrive in the form being feared. Release the dread too, Lord. Every version of the next week's feared things that has been running this week, they are not the future. They are the anxiety about the future dressed as the future. And the actual next week, when it arrives, will be navigated from the resources available at that time, with the guidance provided at that time by the God who is already in next week, before the person living this week arrives there. Lord, I want to pray now about what happens in the interior when the draining thoughts have been released. Space opens. That is the first thing. The interior space that was being occupied by the unfinished, the rehearsal, the comparison, the dread suddenly has room, and that room is not neutral. It is the space where something better can be received, not the absence of the draining thought. The presence of what the draining thought was preventing. There is something in the book of Philippians, chapter 4, verse 8, that belongs exactly here. Whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. That list is not wishful thinking. It is the description of what fills the space the draining thoughts vacated. The true thing, the noble thing, the right and pure and lovely and admirable thing, the excellent thing, the praiseworthy thing. By Friday, The person who has been running the draining thoughts all week has not been thinking about the praiseworthy things. Not because the praiseworthy things were not present, because the draining thoughts were occupying the space where the noticing of praiseworthy things would have happened, the grace that was present on Monday, but that the unfinished thought prevented from being received. The moment of genuine connection on Wednesday, that the comparison thought was still running when it occurred. The small evidence of faithfulness on Thursday, that the dread thought was generating its worst-case forecast while the evidence was appearing. All of those praiseworthy things were there. The draining thoughts were in the way. Receive them now. On this Friday morning, in the space the releasing created, the things that were true and noble and right and pure and lovely and admirable and excellent in this week. They were there. Let this prayer be the moment they are received before the week ends, without them being collected. Your word declares in the book of Psalms, chapter 103, verse 2, to praise the Lord, my soul, and forget not all his benefits. Forget not. The benefits were present all week, in the middle of the draining, in the hours the draining thoughts were running. The benefits were there. Do not forget them now that the prayer has created space to receive what the noise was covering. And I want to ask for something that the receiving of the praiseworthy things produces in the person who receives them. Gratitude, not the performed kind, the genuine kind that arises when the eyes are open to what was actually present all week. The conversation that went better than expected and that the comparison thought walked past without collecting. The provision that arrived and that the unfinished thought was too preoccupied to notice as provision. The moment of unexpected kindness that the rehearsal thought was running over when it arrived. Those moments were in the week. They always are. The question is whether the person was present enough to collect them. The draining thought is the primary obstacle to that collection. It keeps the interior so occupied with what is depleting that the replenishing things pass without being received. Your word declares in the book of Psalms, chapter 34, verse 8, to taste and see that the Lord is good. Taste, see. Those are sensory words, present tense words. The goodness is not only a theological proposition, it is something tasted, something seen by the person whose eyes and palate are available to receive it. And the person who releases the draining thoughts before the weekend creates the interior availability that the tasting and seeing require. Let me taste the goodness of this day, Lord, of this weekend, of the specific unrepeatable hours that are about to begin. With a palate that has been freed by this prayer from the bitterness of the draining thoughts that were running before it. Lord, quiet every thought that has been draining my mind this week. I release the weight and I receive your rest. Father, as this prayer closes, I want to receive something for the weekend that the draining thoughts were preventing all week. Genuine enjoyment. Not the performed enjoyment of a person who has decided to enjoy the weekend while the draining thoughts continue their background hum. The actual thing, the enjoyment that is only available to a person whose interior is genuinely free enough from the week's depletion to actually be in the weekend rather than in the week's continuation. Real enjoyment requires presence, and presence requires that the interior not be occupied. The draining thoughts are the enemies of real enjoyment because they are always pulling the person out of the present moment into the unfinished past or the anticipated future. The comparison pulls the person out of their actual Saturday into someone else's visible Saturday. The dread pulls the person out of the present conversation into the feared next week conversation. The rehearsal pulls the person out of the actual evening into the imagined confrontation. Release all of that now, Lord, before the weekend begins, and let what fills the space be the genuine presence in the moments the weekend actually offers, the conversation that is actually happening, the person who is actually present, the Saturday that is actually here, full of things worth receiving, for the person whose interior is actually open to receive them. Your word declares in the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 3, verse 13, that it is a gift of God for people to eat and drink and find satisfaction in their toil. A gift. The satisfaction, the enjoyment, the genuine reception of what the weekend provides is a gift from God. Not something the person generates through sufficient positive thinking, something received from the God who designed the rhythm of rest and who knows what human beings need to actually recover rather than just pause. Receive the gift of this weekend, Lord, the eating and the drinking, the rest that is genuinely restful, the conversation that is genuinely connecting, the ordinary Saturday that is actually received rather than endured, the Sunday that prepares the interior for next week rather than simply consuming the days until next week arrives. And I want to name something about the relationship between what is released in this prayer and what is received in the weekend. They are not independent events. What is released makes room for what is received. The more completely the draining thoughts are given to God before the weekend begins, the more completely the weekend's gifts can be received. And the person who arrives at Saturday genuinely unburdened by the week's draining thoughts receives a different weekend than the person who carried them forward. Your word declares in the book of Psalms, chapter 16, verse 11, that in God's presence there is fullness of joy, and at his right hand are pleasures forevermore. Fullness. Not the partial enjoyment of a person who is half present. The full enjoyment of a person who is actually there, in the presence of God, where the fullness of joy is located, where the pleasures are not fleeting because they are grounded in the presence of the one who does not deplete what he provides. Let me be fully present for the fullness, Lord, this weekend, in God's presence, where the draining thoughts have no access and the fullness of joy is not reduced by what the week was running. And I want to name something about what Friday's releasing does to Monday. The person who releases the week's draining thoughts before the weekend begins arrives at Monday with something that is not usually available to the person who carried those thoughts straight through. They arrive fresh, not just rested, fresh. The week's mental residue was given to God on Friday. The weekend received the person who was freed from carrying it. And the Monday that follows that kind of weekend begins from a place that is genuinely different from the Monday that follows a weekend that was occupied by the week's leftovers. The Friday releasing is not only for the weekend, it is an investment in the Monday. The release today shapes the start 4 days from now. And the person who makes the Friday releasing a consistent practice is gradually building a different quality of week beginning than the person who carries everything forward and starts each Monday already behind the weight of the previous week. Your word declares in the book of Isaiah, chapter 43, verse 18, that God says, "Forget the former things. Do not dwell on the past." That is the instruction for the person standing at the threshold of the weekend. The former things, the week's draining accumulation, are behind. What is in front is new. The God who is doing a new thing is already in the weekend that is about to begin, and the person who releases the former things before stepping forward into the new thing receives what the new thing is offering in a way that the person still holding the former things cannot. Release. The week is behind. What is in front is new, and the new thing is already beginning. Lord, quiet every thought that has been draining my mind this week. I release the weight and I receive your rest. That is the declaration this Friday ends with and this weekend begins from. The draining thoughts named, the hidden costs of the week brought before God, the space created by the releasing, filled with what only His presence provides. And the weekend beginning not as the week's continuation, but as the genuine rest of a person who gave everything the week cost to the God who was ready to receive it. To everyone who prayed with me this morning, go back to the comments and write it one final time. Lord, quiet every thought that has been draining my mind this week. I release the weight and I receive your rest. Carry that releasing into the weekend. Return to it whenever the week's background thoughts try to follow you into the days that were meant for something different. Subscribe to this channel and come back tomorrow morning. We are here every day, including the Saturdays, that need the same quieting this Friday did. Share this prayer with someone who needs the hidden costs of their week named and released before the weekend inherits them. What you send might change the entire quality of the rest they receive. May the Lord quiet every draining thought in your mind today with the authority of the God who takes captive what has been running free. May the space created by the releasing be filled with what is true and noble and lovely and praiseworthy. May the weekend that begins when this Friday ends be received fully by a person whose interior is genuinely open rather than occupied. And may the rest you receive be the kind that actually restores what the week spent. In Jesus' name, amen.